Who killed Tim Kono? Who killed Zoe? Who killed Evelyn the cat? Who poisoned Winnie the dog? Let's solve Only Murders in the Building. Episode 3, How Well Do You Know Your Neighbors? We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on our hunt to learn who killed Tim Kono. Plus, as a bonus, we'll have our music expert Double M Matt Murdick on this week to do a musical analysis of the Only Murders main theme. Plus, we'll review your feedback. Spoilers for the first 3 episodes. If you haven't seen the first 3 episodes, then this podcast would be like diving into the pool before Oliver has opened the door. #splat. Because we're 3 episodes in, this podcast will also feature our best theories after 3 episodes. And hey, let's start with a theory. Who poisoned Winnie the dog? Well, a couple of things. We assume if the note on the door is tied to the poisoning, the poisoner had to know about the podcast. And according to Mabel, there's only been 4 downloads. Admittedly, a lot of people in the building might know about the podcast, but let's think about that too. It would also help them to know that Oliver never locked his door, meaning they would know they would have easy access into Oliver's apartment to be able to get to Winnie the dog. Let's go with a theory up top. Is it possible that our lead character, Steve Martin's Charles, is very lonely? Charles seems very lonely. Is it possible that he's been planting evidence and other things because he wants to meet people? He wants to get out of his shell? He wants to create his own All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma, which he seems obsessed with, in that he knew about the podcast. He knew that Oliver never locked his door, might throw up a message, hey, stop the podcast or else, and poison Winnie the dog to give the podcast a little extra juice, a little extra possibility? Or is it possible Oliver's doing it himself to build buzz about it? What's your theory? We're going to be giving other theories on the other big mysteries as we go along in this podcast. Please let us know. Note, if you're listening to the podcast version of this, note that in our YouTube version, we're putting up screen grabs of the visual clues that you're going to see as you watch the episode. Please subscribe, follow, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please tickle that like button or you'll be sent to the backline! We'll soon be starting up a podcast focused on FX's adaptation of the graphic novel Why the Last Man. For all the information on the podcast we do, to send in your feedback, if we miss any clues in Only Murder in the Buildings, write to us on Twitter and Instagram at DoublePHQ, Facebook.com/DoublePHQ. That's the word double, the single letter P for podcast, letters HQ for headquarters, at DoublePHQ. We don't often talk about how funny this show can be, but boy, episode 3 was killing it. Charles's very subtle way of saying, you're being recorded, to the hilarious bit with the frozen form of Evelyn the cat, to the disastrous previews for Splash the musical. We laughed a lot at episode 3. What has been your favorite funny moment so far? At DoublePHQ, leave a comment, Facebook, YouTube. We want this to be interactive. Again, before we run down suspects, go over theories, and look at all the clues, let's see what episode 3 taught us about our victim, Tim Kono. According to Howard Morris, Tim was more angry and frustrated recently in that he was fired from his investment firm from losing someone a whole lot of money. Probably someone we should assume we've met or will meet. Howard says his cat Evelyn wandered into Tim's apartment through the window, and it's implied that Evelyn was probably poisoned. Plus, Tim Kono had a note that he kept. The note read the initials G.M., then 1/31 at symbol 4:30 p.m. Shore Road. Obviously, you're looking at this, you see 131, you might think that's the date, January 31st at 4:30 p.m. Shore Road might be a location, but G.M. Who could be our G.M.? Before we look at our likely suspects, our usual suspects, let's have a brief look at the unusual suspects. And we have a couple of new ones in episode 3. First up, Sting, the Stingster, Stingerino, the Stingmeister. Sting hates dogs and specifically seems to dislike Oliver's dog Winnie. Sting also acts very rude when Oliver mentions Tim Kono and asks him about Tim Kono. Sting knows about the podcast because Oliver told him about the podcast. Plus, Sting broke up the police, so he's very evil. We're putting her currently in unlikely suspects because we have just a small taste of the character known as Jan, the first chair of the bassoon. There's a little flirting with Charles on the elevator. If there were any clues on the stickers on her bassoon case, I couldn't find them. Plus, we have a new character called Teddy Demas. Teddy lives on the 6th floor, specifically apartment 6B. Teddy owns Demas Deli, which provided the edibles for the memorial for Tim Kono. It's implied that Oliver and Teddy hadn't seen each other for a while. Teddy knows about the podcast. He's financing the podcast, so he's certainly a possibility in the people who could have poisoned Winne the Dog. Plus, once again, I mentioned Teddy lives in apartment 6B. When we first saw Tim Kono in episode 1, he's getting on the elevator with our 3 lead characters. He had been on the 6th floor and then rides the elevator up to his apartment on the 9th. We get another couple of glimpses of Teddy's son, Theo. Theo is deaf, but assuming Oliver was in there and or Teddy might have told his son about this, there's a good chance that Theo would also know about the podcast. The actress Jackie Hoffman, who we've been calling Bird Lady because she keeps shooting people the birds, in this case, in the imaginary dream sequence in the theater, she shot Oliver the bird. Well, we know now her character's name. Her name is Uma Heller. We see that written on Charles's board of possible suspects. The person we've been describing as the person in the white jumper, the person in the white hoodie. Well, in the 3rd episode, it's described as a tie-dye hoodie. So that's what we're going to refer to this person from now on. It should also be noted in that flash forward that opened episode 1, where you saw Bloody Mabel hovering over a person on the floor. That person was wearing the tie-dye hoodie. We're keeping Howard Morris down in the unusual suspects for now, but Howard certainly could get bumped up. In this theater sequence, Howard claims that Tim threatened to shoot Evelyn. We should assume that that information came from the complaints that Ursula gave Oliver. Real quickly, Howard's name is Howard Morris, and of course he loves cats, makes you think Morris the cat, the advertising mascot for the 9 Lives brand cat food. Howard lives on the 3rd floor. He claims to faint at the sight of blood, and we see him do it. Do you believe him? There's a big picture of a cat above Howard's fireplace, but it's not Evelyn. It's instead a cat named Barbara, who Howard said was a total B word. There's one more new suspect we need to add to the suspect board, and that's Jose Torres, Oscar's dad. Remember, Oscar was the other male Hardy boy in Mabel's group, besides Tim Kono. So why should we consider Jose Torres, Oscar's dad? Well, as Super, once again, he would have keys to every apartment. Plus, he might obviously be bitter about Tim not exonerating his son and his son having to go away for 10 years. Jose, just so we know, lives in apartment J. I don't think we know what floor Jose lives on. What do you think? Of our big 4 suspects, Oscar we really didn't learn anything about in this episode other than his dad, Jose, still there in the building. Looking at Oliver, we know from this episode that Oliver has lived in the Arconia since at least 2005. We also keep learning more about Oliver's personal life. We hear the story of his ex-wife, Roberta. We learn that he blew his son Will's college fund. I'm not sure any of these facts point to him being the killer, but perhaps if we add them up later, it might point some guilty fingers towards Oliver. Let's look at Charles. After flirting with Jan in the elevator, he asks Mabel if his nose is bleeding. Later, when talking to Howard Morris, he stumbles over cat food and his nose bleeds. He claims it bleeds from anxiety. While trying to cheer up Oliver, Charles says, "You can lose a lot with one big mistake." Is this the story of Lucy? Or is it another line from his show Brazos? Charles, as I mentioned earlier in Who Poisoned Winne the Dog theory, knew that Oliver never locks his door. Our final big suspect is still Double M, Mabel Mora. Mabel is drawing a picture of Bunny looking out a window on the wall of this apartment she claims is her aunt's apartment that she's remodeling. This doesn't really feel like a typical remodel. Mabel also knew that Oliver doesn't lock his door. One final thing that people have pointed out is that Mabel's apartment is on the 12th floor, and it seems to be 12E. But way back in the flashback in episode 2, where young Mabel met young Tim Kono, Tim Kono claimed that her aunt lived in 12A. Before we get to your feedback, let's go over our current big theory that we have. This theory isn't what we actually think happened. It's pretty much a beta version of our big theory as we continue to work on our official Who Killed Tim Kono theory release. The theory goes, Person X lives in the Arconia with a loved one we'll call Person Y. Person Y has an episode where they need their prescription medications badly. Person X runs to get the drugs that Person Y needs, but learns that the drugs are gone. Person Y dies. Person X is devastated. Little do they know that the Hardy Boy member, Zoe, had stolen those prescription meds from their apartment. Move forward a bit. Tim Kono has a crush on Person X. He slicks back his hair to make his move on Person X during a New Year's Eve party. Note that Mabel, when she saw Tim at the New Year's Eve party, was like, ooh, you slick back your hair. That's impressive. So, Tim Kono's going to go, make a move with Person X. But when he goes to Person X, he sees that person having a fight with Zoe. Why are they having a fight? Because Person X sees Zoe wearing some jewelry that was related to their loved one, Person Y. They believe that Zoe stole the jewelry and the meds which led to Person Y's death and throw Zoe off the roof. Oscar, the kid who gave Zoe the keys, is in jail for 10 years. Person X thinks justice is done. Meanwhile, Tim, who really, really likes Person X, he can't come out and tell the cops the truth about what he saw. Flash forward 10 years. Tim Kono is having money trouble because he lost a lot of money. In desperation, he thinks of going through all the old jewelry that Zoe stole. Maybe there's something he can pawn and make a quick buck off. But of course, Tim doing this reveals to Person X that Tim was part of the initial theft, which stole the medication which caused Person Y to die. Person X snaps and kills Tim Kono. Once again, that's our beta theory for who killed Tim Kono and why. Who do you suspect the killer is? Write us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at DoublePHQ, Facebook.com/DoublePHQ, or leave a comment on YouTube. Before we get to your feedback, here's Double M with a look at the Only Murders in the Building theme.
As Bubba guides you through what has to be a challenge for Hoffman and Martin, a comedy yet murder mystery with some drama involved as well, combining all of those kinds of genres seems very difficult. Now imagine if you're Siddhartha Khosla, the composer for this show, who you probably know most, or the work that he's most famous for would probably be This Is Us. Imagine trying to create a theme for this television show, something that represents the way that it is a comedy, and it is a drama, and it has three principal characters. Now, the main theme itself, the theme that you hear at the beginning of the episode or near the beginning of the episode, isn't all of that challenging harmonically, but there are a couple of monikers that tell you how Siddhartha was trying to create something that put together all of the genres in his music theme, just as the showrunners were trying to create this piece of work. Here is that main theme. And that part pretty much just repeats over and over throughout the course of the theme. There's a couple of things that are very interesting about it. When we think of how harmony makes us feel in regards to watching television, we understand, for the most part, that what musicians call minor chords tend to sound more serious, or minor harmony tends to sound more serious. And the melody here implies a minor harmonization, like this. That creates a minor chord. On the other hand, at the ending of each of these phrases, there is major harmony, and major tends to make us feel lighter, which might be applying to the comedy aspect. again, I'm talking about this part, that outlines a major chord. Like that. And if you just play the two chords one right after the other, you can hear a difference in them. One will actually make you feel a little more dark, and one will make you feel a little less dark, if not happy. I don't know if anybody can be happy these days, but less dark. Let's just put it that way. So by combining the two different kinds of harmonies into a single piece, that's how Khosla actually combined elements of the genres. There's a couple of other things that should be noted as far as this theme goes. The vocalization is a timbre, or the instrument used, that helps create a certain feeling for us as well. And those feelings can vary depending on how it's used. Since this is a minor sounding melody, it tends to have a little bit of a darker aspect to it. On the other hand, the strings can be quite bouncy, and the rhythm that they are played in, the triplet rhythm, that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, that tends to put a little bounce in your step. And so that alludes to the happier side. Another thing that I found interesting was, if you count out the measures, if you listen to this, there are really 3 different phrases of 2 measures. That's not something that we normally have. Normally, we as humans like our phrasing in music, not necessarily anywhere else, but at least in music, to be more symmetrical. Now, a 6-measure phrase is dividable by 2, so there is some degree of symmetry in it. But we're much more used to 4-measure phrases, or 8-measure phrases, or even 16-measure phrases, where our count goes around 16 times, or 8 times, or 4 times. Here, the count only goes around 6 times. But because there are 3 principal characters, the math works out that each character kind of gets 2 of those times around counting for themselves. On the other hand, this phrase could be interpreted as a 4-measure phrase with 2 extra measures tacked on at the end, because the first full phrase does feel like a 4, but then you add that extra 2 on. And maybe Khosla is trying to tell us, yes, it seems to fit, but as you've seen with each episode, we get a little extra something that makes us go, wah? And maybe the extra 2 measures are the musical wah? And I'm kind of spitballing here. I'm going to have to watch more of the series and see how those themes play in with the entirety of the series in order to figure out if there's any actual representation of the characters in the main theme. But I liked going down that road with you, and hope you enjoyed this musical analysis. Remember, please subscribe to the Double P Media YouTube. Please follow Double P Media at the word double, the letters PHQ on Twitter or on Instagram, and going and liking the Facebook page, facebook.com/the word double, the letters PHQ.
That's Double M Matt Murdick, not Mabel Mora. To reach him, go to Twitter, at Musical Concepts on Twitter, at Musical Concepts. Matt does a bunch of great podcasts with us and other people, and he is a great follow, great listen, and as you heard right there, very knowledgeable. Let's get to your feedback. On YouTube, Gavin wrote this comment based on our beta version of our theory, and he wrote, he thinks the person X is Oliver. Gavin wrote, if you look at the colors in episode 1, Oliver wears a lot of purple, black, and blue. Gavin's theory is Oliver accidentally got one of Tim's packages back at the beginning of episode 1, found the jewelry in it, or cash, and then went to confront Tim Kono, murdered him with a cat, with his dog getting sick in episode 3. He thinks the dog is a fake-out when he's poisoning, because he believes from previews that the dog survives, which makes me even more sus, he wrote. We got another bit of feedback from our friend in Germany who wrote, I think the backstory of the Hardy Boys is really cool and interesting. I hadn't thought that there would be an incident in the group so serious. I did think there would be a reason for the group to separate. But that one member just straight up got murdered and another one got arrested for the murder they probably didn't commit, that really surprised me. I think there is a high possibility that someone who has already been introduced on the show murdered Zoe, maybe even Tim Kono. That would explain why he didn't defend Oscar, even though he claimed he saw someone else do it. But should we keep an eye on Oscar? He's been in prison for 10 years. So even though he didn't murder Zoe, at least that's what this feedback person wrote, if he knew that Tim Kono knew he wasn't the one who did it, then he would be mad at Tim that Tim didn't tell the police, which could have saved him from false imprisonment. That would be reasonable motive for murdering Tim. This person wrote, Oscar has been released from prison before Tim Kono died. Also, he knew where he lived, so it could possibly be an act of revenge. Once again, this person writes, if Tim Kono murdered Zoe and Oscar saw it, that would give him another huge motive for murdering Tim. He thinks Oscar was the hoodie guy, aka now the tie-dye guy, very suspicious. This person on YouTube also wrote, I think Mabel wants to keep the ring because even though she and Tim Kono weren't friends and they didn't like each other anymore, she does seem to have an emotional connection to him. They were very good friends back then, and I think it's very hard for you if your ex-friend gets murdered. Ooh. Final bit of feedback we had is we don't know how old Lucy was. It could have been Lucy was Charles's daughter, and Zoe stole the ring from Charles's daughter. Ooh. This person wrote, it would explain a lot. We love feedback. That's the only reason why we're doing this, is to interact with you and solve who killed Tim Kono. Let's solve Only Murders in the Building. Once again, write out to us on Facebook.com/DoublePHQ, Twitter and Instagram @DoublePHQ. The word double, the single letter P, the letters HQ for headquarters. If you're on YouTube, we're begging you. Please leave a comment. Please leave the clues we missed. Give us your theories. Hit the like button. Subscribe. We'll be back in a bit to break down all the clues based on episode 4.